Welcome to the Law Firm Growth Podcast, where we share the latest tips, tactics, and strategies for scaling your practice from the top experts in the world of growing law firms. Are you ready to take your practice to the next level? Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. I'm super excited to speak with today's guest. We've got somebody who I've known in this space for a really long time. We recently started connecting a little bit more, and I was like, man, I got to get this guy on the podcast. But you may know him, you may not, but we're going to get introduced to him soon. Latz, who is the founder of LegalFenix and an absolute wealth of knowledge for everything in terms of law firm management, marketing. We're going to get into his background a little bit depth. And we were just talking about some really cool stuff on the pre-chat. So I think this is going to be a really big one. If you guys are in the mix, a lot of stuff out there that Ron's going to be able to chat with us about. And it's always good to have somebody else in the industry to kind of talk about things at a high level with. So super excited to have him on the pod. And Ron, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a good time.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of catch you up with, for those who don't know you, how'd you get into this crazy world of law firm marketing and management?
I actually got my start almost a decade and a half ago at the infamous FindLaw at Thomson Reuters, which was an incredible opportunity that I couldn't be more grateful for. It's where I established a lot of really great relationships, friendships, and some of those firms that I worked with that long ago are even still clients today. But that's how I got into the legal vertical. Historically, sales, marketing guy, my entire career. I've obviously sold marketing products and services and solutions to law firms. And then through my consulting and fractional work, I've purchased and invested on behalf of law firms to help them grow their practices and ensure that they're not getting price gouged or getting the wool pulled over their eyes. And it's just something I really enjoy. I'm a competitive person by nature, and a lot of the firms that I work with are in some highly competitive markets. So I really do look forward to going to work every day and helping my clients achieve the goals that they've set out to achieve.
Okay, awesome. And as far as the kind of work that you do too, because we talked about this a little bit months ago on a different call, but what would you kind of describe what it is that you do? Like, I think fractional CMO, is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, that's the core offering of LegalFenix. I started about 7 or 8 years ago when I was initially incorporated, doing mostly consulting and advisory work. And that's just because of the relationships that I had. I had firms coming back to me saying, hey, Ron, should I renew this, or should I make this investment in this channel? Or do I need a website redesign? Or as these new ad units like local services ads came to service professionals, they're like, should I try this out? So I always kept the pulse on the market and continued to maintain those relationships. And through that consulting work over the course of 7 or 8 years, was able to build up a much larger book of business to go out officially on my own. But I still do the consulting and advisory work as a crawl, walk, run type of approach to feeding my fractional engagements. I think, not every firm needs fractional. It's overkill for them. So if I can just help them dot the I's, cross the T's on their strategy, put them on the right roadmap to achieve better results, that's great. And we just keep in touch, and a lot of those clients will even come back and re-engage if and when they need it. If not, it's great. And I've had a great experience. The other thing is that we pretty much develop the scope for a fractional engagement through a consulting engagement, because when I'm consulting or doing some coaching or advisory work on the marketing and sales side of the house, right, I'm not implementing, executing, or deploying these campaigns. I'm pointing them in the right direction of individuals like yourself or other marketing vendors that can manage ads on their behalf, can build or design a website, because I'm not doing any of that. So that's very referral driven. And I make sure that they're just working with partners that I think are going to be best fit for their culture, for their business model, their firm makeup. And then they realize the things that I'm not doing or they might need additional help with, like vendor oversight or managing some in-house resources, marketing coordinators, things of that nature. We start to put together the pieces of what a fractional engagement could look like. And that's where I've been able to have the most success.
Yeah. So I want to just kind of take this out a little bit to for the listeners who aren't super familiar with how these things kind of work. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like, and you definitely notice, Ron, it's just like we have a very different hierarchy of how things end up looking in a law firm than most normal businesses. And I can kind of say, just as far as friends of mine that work in the marketing industry elsewhere, like I'm actually, my fiance is, in the level where it's kind of interesting to see all these different levels of engagement and some of these things. Cause I think it's kind of rare. Like, honestly, it's, when you think it like law firms that have like a proper full-time CMO, very kind of rare to see, to be honest. Like a lot of the times that's the kind of thing that'll fall under like a managing partner thing, but it's very defined outside of the law, and just to kind of get people fixed on what these things do. So it's like, typically, and there's absolutely title inflation where you have somebody who's basically a receptionist who self-identifies as a CMO or something like that. But like in truth, like what quality CMO does at any business, including a law firm, is provide the strategic direction, and they're not necessarily going to be the hands-on in the ad account or your content management system or that kind of thing. But the leverage that you can potentially have from being able to have clarity on where your strategy should be and help put all the pieces together and stuff, that is just getting, frankly, more complex every single day. And like, that's kind of where this whole thing ends up fitting in. So just to kind of talk about where these things are at, and just put things in the context for what level of information we're going to be talking about here. So, okay. We're going to kind of transition to sort of a big one too. So in terms of like what you're kind of seeing in the market today, Ron, like where do you think are the gaps with most of the firms that are potentially coming to you for what they're growing their firm?
And most of the firms that do come to me are looking just for help with that overall strategic direction initially. They probably have a bunch of marketing investments, but there's no cohesive marketing strategy in place. And then ensuring that the tactics that are associated with that strategy are aligned to specific goals and objectives. Usually they're revenue based, right? So they're either trying to eclipse a certain amount of revenue, or they want to bring in a certain number of clients at a certain acquisition cost, but they haven't tied it all together. So the initial months of that engagement, we're just trying to make sense of all that. Maybe there's some technology components, some operational components, but at the forefront, we're really just making sure there's no random acts of marketing. We're making sure that our actual investments are producing the return, or at least the outcome that we were hoping to achieve. And if there's any right fixing, right, if they don't have a vendor in place for something, or they feel like an alternative would be better suited to help them meet their goals, we kind of talk and walk through all of that to make sure that the strategy, the marketing operations, the vendors and partners that are in place are all rowing in the same direction to make sure that they can hit those objectives.
Okay, gotcha. And then as far as, and I kind of have maybe an abstract question here, but why do you think it's so rare for law firms to have a cohesive strategy in place? Like, what's stopping them from doing that?
I think that, one of the reasons is that the legal marketing industry has kind of preyed upon the community in which it has served for so long, whether it's through absurd pricing or not giving access to certain tools, systems, or data. A lot of firms are jaded and skeptical because there's a lot of false promises and smoke and mirrors out there. I mean, I'm sure that you've seen that within some of your clients where they were promised the world, they were promised life-changing results. And much of that, I do think, comes down to improper or poorly setting and managing and resetting expectations. Right? Like every industry is going to have their bad actors out there, but I don't believe that every legal marketing agency or just marketing agencies in general are out there to like gotcha to the firm. I do think that there is good intention out there, but a lot of the businesses are trying to obviously generate their own revenue. It's sometimes difficult to talk to a firm and say, listen, this is a long-term investment. You're not going to see results overnight. And if that is the expectation, I think it's difficult for some of those agencies to walk away from the short-term business rather than letting that firm go out and kind of fall on their face and get back up on that bike once they realize that the original person that was trying to set those expectations was just trying to do a solid for them.
Okay, so it's like that old phrase, like, don't go to the barber if you need to ask for a haircut. I think this has always been an issue too. Is just like, you have the fact that when you're dealing with marketing vendors, they're really good at marketing generally. Like at least the ones that are worth their sauce, and they can be very, very convincing. And the thing that sucks is that if you've got 12 different things you could potentially be looking at, and everyone's making a really, really compelling case, it's really tough to suss this stuff out.
Yeah, it's hard because you go to any SEO, any SEO is going to tell you there's a lot of things that you could be doing better. There's things that you should be doing differently. We can improve this metric, or we can increase your leads or your qualified opportunities or the amount of cases that you sign. I mean, without having all the context and understanding the pieces in place, seeing their metrics, seeing how that impacts revenue, case generation, acquisition costs. I mean, it's very difficult to tell. And I think a lot of times some agencies will get themselves in trouble, or the firms would get themselves in trouble because they don't always give the agency access to all of that information, right? Like when you are in a sales cycle, most firms are not giving access to analytics or the ads platform or giving them any insight into intake management software. Rightfully so. You should still, put some confidentiality or NDAs in place to make sure you're not sharing that type of information. But it can be difficult to set a proper target as surround performance expectations without knowing all the pieces on the board. And I think that's where both sides can get into some trouble.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense too when you're thinking about somebody who's in a marketing leadership position or like fractional CMO or full-time CMO, just like that kind of layer. Realistically, you couldn't expect 10 different vendors to understand how the other 9 work and what the big picture is and that stuff. So it's kind of not their job at the end of the day. And like when people are focused, a lot of times they can't get better results for that stuff. So having somebody in place to be able to put all these pieces together and make sure it supports the big strategy kind of is like that big context for that. But I just wanted to mention something super quick too. It is something I cannot stand seeing. And like I get targeted with ads for this stuff all the time too, Facebook or Instagram or whatever. It's not done a great job of figuring out that I'm not a law firm, but it's possibly also because I'm sending these to people in my company and saying, look at this ridiculous claim today. But it's just like, it's insane. The inflation is just like, okay, hey, like, it was like, we'll get you, like, I don't know, 2 years ago, hey, we'll get you a case in the first month. Now it's like, we're going to get you 30 cases in 15 days, or you can come to my house and shoot me in the head. It's like the most ridiculous stuff that you see out there.
It's funny that you mentioned that. My post today on LinkedIn was specifically around how agencies or marketing partners typically will use testimonials or case studies, but there's a lot of information that's typically missing. One, like that context. First of all, how did that firm define success? What were they looking to achieve? Second of all, what were the complementary marketing efforts that helped supported those efforts? You can see these headlines: invest $5,000 a month in Facebook and get 650 cases within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We promise you. And these are the firms that have multi-million-dollar radio campaigns. They're on billboards everywhere. They've got the TV commercials that are running on Sunday football. Like there are other things that were helping drive the success of that paid ad campaign, but those are typically left off and left out whenever you're looking at your case study or sharing the success on a sales call when you're trying to pitch another firm. The other thing is there is no standardized definition of what a qualified lead or opportunity is across legal. Like take personal injury, for example. There are some firms that are pre-lit firms. There's other firms that are trial and litigating firms. And both of those might not agree on what a qualified opportunity or lead is. Same thing with like divorce and family law, right? Some firms, they'll offer a free consult. Others, they charge for it because they're only working with, let's just say, high net individuals that have a lot of assets where they're not typically doing a free consult and are going to pretty much offer a much lower retainer. That the qualification criteria there is very different. So before you go and sign up for something, just ask for context. It's not necessarily a referral call or a reference call, but when you are talking to somebody, whether it's in a mastermind or you're doing some networking, try to understand what the other pieces were that were at play. The other thing is you've got to be ready for that type of result. Like if your business model is not high volume, lower case value, and you're typically taking less cases at a higher value, like for you to get that influx of hundreds of new leads even, or just hundreds of phone calls, you've got to have the infrastructure in place to be able to handle that. Unless your intake, your receptionists are going to get completely bombarded. There's a heavy administrative burden that comes with qualifying all of those calls. And then you've got to see like, well, do we have the staff to take on that many cases? If you do, great, all day, go for it. If you don't, you should just make sure that you've got that service delivery, intake, and the infrastructure in place to handle that influx, unless you're just going to be investing in poor first impressions at scale. They're going to call the firm.
Yeah.
They're going to call the firm. They're going to feel like they're not getting the attention or the quality of service that you're typically accustomed to providing. And then the last thing that you want is for someone to come on, call your firm. They don't treat you well. You don't even get them an opportunity to be a client, and they go and leave a review to tell them how bad that initial experience was. You're just shooting yourself in the foot there.
Yeah. I really love that quote, Ron. Poor first impressions at scale. Which it's honestly such a true thing.
It is. People want to go and invest tens of thousands of dollars, but there's no overflow or weekend or after hours coverage. So you have like all these phone calls that are coming in that go unanswered. And forget about it. If you're invested in something like local services ads and you don't have coverage where someone is answering the phone, like your performance on your LSA is going to plummet. Google's not going to want to continue sending you those opportunities because Google wants to make more money. And if you're not answering that phone call, they're not going to continue giving you the at-bats. They're going to give it to the person where their phone call answer rate is as close to 100 as possible. They respond in as short amount of time as possible. So Google's going to keep feeding those firms all of that business because it keeps putting money back into Google's pockets.
Yeah, 100%. And it's one of those things, I feel like I'm seeing it less and less these days, but you used to kind of see a lot of these things trotted out as far, oh yeah, I tried Google ads, they don't work. I tried LSAs, they don't work. I tried Facebook, it doesn't work. But what I'm kind of seeing in terms of the context here too, is like, you can have the situation where you can have like, the best drill on the market, but if you need a hammer, like, it's not something you should be buying.
Right. And I think that's where some firms also, depending upon what they like, you don't want to go to the firm or you don't want to go to the agency that is specializing in paid search for all of your SEO if they don't do SEO, right? Like there are plenty of partners out there, mutual friends and acquaintances of ours, where I've even spoken to them, given them an opportunity, and they've come back to me and they've said, you know what, this really isn't our wheelhouse. I appreciate you coming to me and giving me an opportunity. We thought that there might have been some way that we could have been able to do this, but the ones that then push back and know that they're only going to do themselves a disservice, I think those are the ones that see the most success.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this kind of gets back to something I was thinking about a ton when we ended up getting started. So I don't know if I told this story in the podcast for the listeners, but this isn't the first time we've talked about this or not. But I remember back, I ended up signing my first AdWords clients back in 2015. And it was really funny because that was like the real go-go days of SEO. And there was kind of like also a lot of these sort of like full service agencies. I feel like I see fewer and fewer of those around these days, but it was just like kind of the old vestiges of like the web guys who became SEO guys, who became content guys, and then threw AdWords into the mix. So we had an absolute field day, like both competing against those firms who are necessarily specialized and partnering with SEO firms for kind of like an integrated approach, but we do our part, you do your part. But it's kind of an interesting thing to kind of keep in mind too, because it's like, I feel like the more complex things get in the world of marketing, it's just like, I honestly like, just talking about SEO too, like, shoot, I don't even do AdWords anymore. Like if somebody said, hey, I've got like a, 20, all right, actually statement of fact. I had one of the juiciest opportunities I've ever come across my desk for an enormous firm. I'm not going to specify the practice area in Canada. I'm just like, honest to God, like, this would be incredible billable, but I haven't really focused on AdWords in like 2 or 3 years. There's better people to do this.
And if they're as big as you're saying, and you go and you take that engagement and potentially burn that bridge because you're not able to provide the service that you're accustomed to, now that's going to, your reputation and your name will get a poor rating across the industry or that specific market. Like it's a ripple effect. It's just a negative downstream impact of taking on business that you necessarily shouldn't be playing in. Kudos to you, man.
Yeah. But also like for everyone listening too, it's also a huge lesson for legal marketing as well too. Like, if you're really defined on your characteristic, this kind of goes back to the qualification perspective. It's like, yeah, look, if you're a high net worth divorce firm, like don't take a bunch of mediation cases. You're probably charging more than you want to pay anyway. It's like, your staff's going to resent it, right? So it's like, but okay. So kind of going back to one of the things, I thought it was very interesting how you ended up breaking down some things too. I just kind of want to get clear on terms for the bigger audience here. So you kind of mentioned strategy, marketing, operation, and vendors. Could you go into a little bit of depth on how you define those 3 things and how it kind of fits into someone's overall plans for growth?
Yeah, look at the marketing strategy. Typically, that is your plan. Whether it's an annual plan, you have a quarterly marketing plan, whatever it is, you set out to achieve a specific goal, and then we're going to outline how we think that we're going to get there with the associated tactics. What is our investment going to be? How are we going to allocate investments across specific channels? Align it with our business model, tie it back to goals that are typically, revenue-based or revenue outcomes. We take a look at the local landscape, the competitive landscape, taking all those things into consideration so that we can all be having a blueprint as to what we're going to attack in a particular time frame. The marketing operations, I think, does have some overlap with, your sales, your intake, and your technology, right? So we talk about things like dynamic call tracking software so that we can capture source attribution data. And does that information then get pushed into something like an intake management software or a CRM so that whenever a contact record is created, we are pulling information from the intake management system about where that individual came from. And then throughout your sales cycle and qualification stages or buckets, however you define them, you can move them along in a deal or an opportunity life cycle. Then you have technology like your website CMS. Where is that information and that website environment hosted? Your domains, right? That's marketing automation software, your newsletter. I mean, we can go on and on about all the types of technology that we can use, but I consider that all like your marketing operations and your tech stack there. So I try to have conversations looking at the holistic picture and where all these pieces fit together so that the firm can have a centralized place or at least some sort of report to see how those investments are producing or how they're performing as it relates to the strategy that we set.
Okay, gotcha. I think it makes all the sense in the world too, because it's like, within the smaller silo of what we're dealing with a lot of the ads that we're running for clients, it's like, we always say, hey, look, there's no point in running ads if you don't understand what kind of money it's bringing in, what kind of results are. It's, it's like driving a car with the windshield blacked out. But in the bigger picture, it can get a lot more complex. And that's kind of the same thing, which is, it's kind of interesting. Like, I think, it totally makes sense if you wanted to go in order on those three things. So strategy, operations, vendors. But I think in practice, it seems like people are going backwards for the most part. Like more into the vendors and working backwards. You speak to that?
Yes, that happens a lot of time. They think, hey, I just have to build the website or I have to invest in SEO or I just need to throw ads on to start generating clients. I think if you start at the beginning with the strategy and understand the target that you want those vendors or partners or consultants to hit, you're going to save yourself a lot of frustration, disappointment, and save a lot of money. Just understanding so that you can tell them, this is how I'm going to define success. At the end of the day, if I'm looking at leads or qualified opportunities or the amount of retainers or signups that I generate, or I'm trying to achieve a specific acquisition cost or acquire a case at a cost less than X, now they know, and you can hold each other accountable throughout the relationship with that particular vendor. Now, it depends upon also like where they are in their stage of being an attorney. Are they fresh out of school? Are they leaving an established firm? What is their market? Like those are things that you and I have to suss out when we're making recommendations for the marketing investment and then setting expectations around what we think that the performance of that investment will produce.
Gotcha. And as far as the marketing operations things, just to kind of double click on that a little bit too, what do you generally see as the level of that with firms of different sizes? Is that something that's normally set up by the time you end up hopping in there? And if it's not, like, where do you think the most common gaps are within some of these marketing operations setup?
I mean, in agency life, it was all over the map, right? There were still firms that, listen, even if it's done on a legal pad or an Excel workbook, as long as you are tracking it some way, somehow, so that you can report back on it and know based off of your investment, we either went up or down as far as what we were receiving inbound, at least start there. The firms that I'm working with now, I'm a little bit more selective and I want to ensure that they at least have the resources and the technology or at least something in place so that I can help them work on improving it so that they can get to that desired state of, I've got the dashboard. I understand at minimum a monthly basis what that investment is producing, how much revenue or how many clients or prospects or opportunities were created in that given 4-week period. And then this way I can go back to my vendor landscape and let them know whether we hit, miss, or we're not meeting expectations. Some firms have it fully fleshed out. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that I don't want to say they're few and far between, but the ones that have everything tied up from initial intake to collecting payment from the client, like throughout their entire journey, they're sometimes their needles in a haystack.
Yeah. But I mean, you can kind of imagine how that's going to make somebody, it's kind of funny too, because I mean, I know there's people who are going to be listening to this and be like, oh man, this seems like a lot of work, guys. Like, I don't know if I want to like get into this or pay somebody to get me into this, but you kind of think about the benefits from this up too. It's just like, it's really, you're able to translate different things from different inputs and vendors into one language and get that into the return on investment that you need. And it's really, really powerful there too, because when you can kind of see where these levers are, it's like you're not flying blind. When you're getting into money in, money out kind of thing, it's like I can guarantee, I probably venture a guess, Ron, it's like the people that have that stuff set up are either on the larger side of things or become large very soon afterwards because that's kind of what you need in place. But yeah, just like, if you want to get the dream team together, you need to have somebody to manage all that stuff together. And like, the numbers are such a key part of that, because otherwise, how are you going to see how these things are going to be fitting in together?
For those that are overwhelmed, you can do this at a very affordable price. You purchase some sort of dynamic call tracking software, whether it's through CallRail, What Converts, where you can look at every single lead that is coming into your website, right? They put a number on your website so that they can track back and they can give you source attribution data. There's a lot of other bells and whistles with like AI and conversational intelligence where they're going to record the call and maybe give you a little bit of insight. But in the beginning stages, just get that baseline so that you can then start even manually tracking or using that system to understand how many leads came in, how many of them were qualified, and then of those qualified opportunities, how many do we retain or sign up? That's just the baseline. Right. And it doesn't have to be this super complicated multi-touch attribution model where you're given specific percentages to certain marketing channels. You just want to understand what is generating the demand for your services. And then ultimately, you can try to boil down what is capturing that demand through the marketing channels that you've had placements in.
Yeah. You remind me of another quote right now, too. I think it was the guy who was John Wanamaker. I think he said, I think half of my advertising spend is wasted. I just don't really ever know which half it is. But when you get this stuff in place, you can get to the point where you can actually know. And that's, how people are able to get a much stronger return on investment. So, okay, pivoting a little bit, I wanted to get into some stuff that you've been seeing lately. So like what kind of stuff, we were talking a little bit on the pre-chat about some stuff around like Google LSAs and AI overviews and stuff like that. So what should firms that have most of their stuff dialed in be worried about or concerned about moving forward into, just these days?
Yeah, I think the hottest topic, especially when everyone is not saying that SEO is dead, is that these AI overviews have been rolled out to pretty much every single user. It's no longer where you needed to be part of that search generative experience beta test that was pretty much running all of last Q3 and Q4. A little bit into earlier this year as well. But all the users are starting to see, and within the legal space, most of them at least, are starting to see the AI overview. And everyone is trying to figure out, how do we track that? How do we figure out like our placements in AIOs? You're not going to get that information in your Google Analytics or in your Search Console, right? There are other tools that are out there that you can start to glean some insights from. But when you see the AI overviews, a lot of it's like an enhanced featured snippet, right? It is offering you the ability to see some of the sources, and many of those sources are the questions that you ask in more long form content and in blog content, or they're providing sources from legal directories. If you were nominated or have won some of those awards, and I know that's a whole different conversation about the legitimacy of them, and people are skeptical of them all, but they're still showing up as the validating resource that some of these large language models are using to say why they produce this top 10 list of best personal injury attorneys in Manhattan or New York.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very interesting. The way that I'm able to get these searches to show up are the how to, do I, should I, do I need types of searches. So like, do I need a lawyer to fight my traffic violation ticket? What is the difference between divorce and mediation, right? Like, how much do I need to pay a personal injury lawyer? And that's the types of responses that I see most frequently coming through AIO. It's not the personal injury lawyer, New York, divorce attorney, NJ. It's those types of searches.
That's super interesting. It's kind of thinking too, like my personal experience too, like I was cooking some weird dish over the weekend. And I was like, oh, can you eat Branzino skin or do you need to take it off? And I started getting the AI overviews, but like, yeah, I can imagine how that would change the strategy as far as what people are thinking about for content, right?
Yeah, I think that there are still some firms out there that have been maybe working with agencies that are giving them, 4 to 5 blog posts a month for the past 5 to 10 years, and they're only 400 to 500 words. And they probably got slammed by helpful content update and things like that because it was not valuable information. But the ones that were out there that were putting forth like quality information that was very helpful to the end user, answered their questions directly, limited the amount of fluff, not just throw up a 5,000 word document, but something that was thoughtful and really put the end user in mind, are now able to take advantage of what was, previously capitalized on some of those long tail type searches, but they're showing up now as answers directly in the results. And now they're funneling people back to those entities online. And I think that's good for those that were somewhat ahead of the curve and able to capitalize on that right now.
Yeah. And there's probably a through line with that somewhere in terms of the challenging and potentially resource intensive correct way to do things is going to be a little bit more robust in terms of how things evolve with Google than, just doing the weird tactical thing that's cheap and easy to everyone say to do. But I mean, just to also kind of broad frame this to the bigger conversation too, like, you're the vendor that's been providing $2,500 worth of articles for you since, 1998. It's probably not going to be the first person to tell you that that's not working anymore.
Of course, back to your analogy before, I'm not gonna butcher it, but it was along the lines of like, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. If that's all they do, if they are paid to just pump out blog posts every day, why would they ever tell you that blogs aren't going to be the way to the promised land?
Yeah, 100%. And then one last thing I wanted to talk about too, is kind of on the same realm of Google. So it's like we've had a lot of changes coming up with LSAs recently, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly the branded LSA, which, listen, Google is in the business of maximizing revenue per impression, right? So they want to ensure that every time that there's an ad placement that is shown, they are making as much money as possible. There's limited inventory, and they want to capitalize on every single one of those impressions. Now, it depends on, again, your strategy. You might not be in a market where you need to protect your branded search and have a branded ads campaign, or even have to have a branded LSA turned on. Or you could be in a hyper-competitive market where people are consistently bidding on your name and you want to protect your branded investment. So you do launch those types of branded campaigns to ensure that those that get referred to you or know your name, because you've got a ton of like brand awareness campaigns, out of office campaigns that are funneling directly and correctly to you. Again, maybe your bar association, the bar rules don't even allow. It's going to depend on a market by market basis, but that was something that was kind of met with an uproar because people and firms were automatically enrolled into it. Now, is it right for you? I can't tell you that right now on this podcast, but what I could say is you got to test it. Turn it on, turn it off, see what the impact is. And if it makes sense to keep it on, then you should keep it on. And if the unit economics aren't working out and you think you should turn it off, then turn it off. But just see how it's going to impact your non-branded plays. So if you do find that turning off the branded campaign impacts your non-branded and you really relied on that non-branded play, you've got to do the analysis to understand if you're generating and acquiring those cases at a cost that is sustainable for your firm, then maybe you got to keep paying the piper, ensure to get that other revenue coming in still. If not, if it doesn't make sense, unit economics are no longer attractive, then pull out of that market and invest or reallocate those dollars somewhere else that you think is going to produce a better outcome.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it totally, that also just speaks to the importance of having that marketing operations stuff set out. Because if you're not able to determine what the impact is, or you're kind of guessing or a little bit behind, then that might speak to, needing to get some other things in place before you can do those things. But on the flip side, it's kind of cool to think that if you have the situation where you have everything set up and you hear about a cool blog post or something cool in a podcast or something like that, then you can just go out and test it if you have everything set up. And it's probably not easy to get all this stuff in the first place if you don't have it. But once you are, it just makes you so much more agile.
Agreed. You talk about testing there. I think a lot of firms, a misguided approach by a lot of firms is that they look at marketing tests or experiments, and if they don't just knock it out of the park, it's a failure. I think the lessons that you learn from putting yourself out there, testing a campaign, tweaking with some of your messaging or your positioning and your ad copy, or just doing something that's new and different, you're going to get a lot of feedback, whether it's from the market will speak to you and tell you whether it fell flat or it was a resounding success. But you've got to be willing to try and test those things out. And many firms will experiment or have those tests. They won't produce exactly what they wanted to and consider it a complete failure, where I don't really look at it that way. Like the lesson that you learn now makes you that much more prepared and thoughtful and strategic about how you might be able to improve that type of effort moving forward. And I think that's what marketing really is all about.
Really well put, Ron. And at the risk of potentially making this conversation end on a less of a high note, I think we're also coming up on the end of our time too, but this has been fantastic. So, people are kind of picking up what you're putting down. What's the best way to get in your world?
You can check out LegalFenix.com, FENIX, that's LegalFenix.com, or I'm trying to put and produce helpful content and tactical advice out on LinkedIn. Give me a follow, and hopefully I can save you a couple bucks or teach you something along the way.
All right, fantastic. And we're going to have links for that in the show note, guys. But Ron, this has been an awesome, super wide-ranging conversation, but I think it's really important for people to kind of see the bigger picture about how your information is going to affect what you're doing and where it's coming from. Because a lot of the times too, if you're dealing with platforms like Google who have profit incentives and vendors who also have profit incentives, it's kind of interesting to think that, you got to get your own profit incentive advocated for at some point too. So all things to keep in consideration. And I really appreciate you taking the time, Ron. For everybody else, see you guys next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Eastern on Law Firm Growth Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Growth Podcast. For show notes, free resources, and more, head on over to casefuel.com/podcast. Looking forward to catching up on the next episode.